This past week, I've been doing a lot of thinking about empathy. The phrase that we hear all the time when it comes to empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Well, be glad you were not walking in my shoes last Thursday. Steve and I were on our afternoon stroll, walking across the crosswalk, when I looked up and saw a Prius bearing down on us. And by bearing down on us, I mean I had to scream, "Stop!" and smack the palms of my hands against the hood of this woman's car to get her to slam on the brakes. Now, we're fine, but it freaked me out, and it was a really close call. Well, I'm on my mission to help people show up, engage, and connect. And a big piece of connection is empathy. And this is what I want to explore today. It's easy to say, oh yes, I'm empathetic. I'm thinking about the other person. I'm walking in their shoes. But what that near miss taught me last week is that oftentimes when we need empathy the most, it tends to be when it flies out the window. I'm going to tell you about our conversation and the moment that made me realize why it's so important to have empathy, to focus on empathy when tensions are high, when the tough conversations are happening, and when we're maybe in a moment that is really uncomfortable for us. So after I screamed stop, she slammed on the brakes, I started screaming random sentences at her. I think I was trying to process, but was also super angry. I screamed, "You hit us! You have to pay attention! We're in the crosswalk!" And then after a few more random yells, I could sense traffic was still stopped. People were looking and I screamed, "What's your name?" And I don't know what I was going to do with her name. But at that point, I think she was a little bit afraid of me and decided to pull her car over at the side of the road. I also decided to get out of the road so I wouldn't get hit by another Prius. I grabbed Steve, I went over to the bench, and I, at that point, collapsed into tears. I was shaking, I was sobbing, I was replaying it in my mind. I was still angry, but mostly I was freaked out. At this point, the woman crossed the street, and she sat down next to me, and she started apologizing and apologizing and apologizing. Still a little bit angry, I said, "What were you thinking? What were you doing?" She explained her situation, and I realized it really was just an accident. And this is when things got a little interesting. I look over at her, and she was a small, slight lady, and her whole little body was shaking worse than mine. She said, I can't imagine what you thought when you had to scream for me to stop." And in that moment, my anger faded and the empathy came bubbling up. Because in my mind, I thought, Erin, can you imagine being her and looking up and seeing someone screaming, "Stop!" and having to hit the brakes and hope that you didn't hit the person? We've all been there. And although I was trying to hold on to my anger and my frustration, I realized that she was suffering as much as I was. I started consoling her. I was like, you shouldn't drive. I'm a little bit worried about you leaving. And I found that we were both back and forth checking in to make sure that we were okay. Now, every few seconds, I'd still get the, I can't believe that this happened. But when I realized that she was a human being that made a mistake, it made me lose my anger and try to understand what she was experiencing as well. And that is really what empathy is all about. So this week, as you go forward, I want you to think about those moments when maybe you're having a tough conversation. Maybe you're in the heat of the moment with someone. Perhaps you have something that you want to talk about that you feel very passionate about. And what I want you to become aware of is when those emotions are spiking, when you find yourself super angry or frustrated, maybe scared or afraid, it's in that moment, it's even more important to pause and think, if this is what's happening for me, I can't imagine what's happening for them. Or even better, I wonder what is happening for them. And when I did this, it truly made me calm down. It made me get out of my experience because while scary, we were fine. And it gave me some perspective to the whole situation. At the end of the day, empathy isn't about just walking in someone's shoes. It's about experiencing what they're experiencing and having an understanding and appreciation for what they're going through. In that moment, on that bench with that woman who almost hit me, I experienced empathy at its most powerful. My name is Erin O'Malley. I'm on my mission to help people show up, engage, and connect, and I hope to connect with you soon.